Welcome to Sleepy Love Tales, soothing romantic stories to help you relax and fall asleep. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments. If soft, heartfelt tales help you unwind, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a moment of calm. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The Charge Between Us. The fluorescent hum of Denver International Airport's Gate B-23 was a special kind of purgatory. It was the sound of limbo, of lives suspended between departures and arrivals. For Sophie, it was the soundtrack to her rising panic. Her phone, her lifeline, blinked a malevolent red. 2%. "I swear I packed it," she muttered, her voice a frantic whisper lost in the cacophony of rolling suitcases and garbled announcements. She was on her knees, the contents of her carry-on splayed across the vaguely patterned carpet like a sacrifice to the god of lost things. A well-worn copy of Invisible Cities, a tin of mints, a tangle of headphones, but no charging cable. Not the block, not the cord, nothing. Her flight to Chicago, the final leg of a journey towards a new life and a new job in urban planning, was boarding in 20 minutes. Her digital boarding pass, the email with her new apartment details, the contact number for the moving company, it was all trapped behind that dying screen. She sat back on her heels, the weight of it all pressing down. This was supposed to be a triumphant leap, the culmination of years of study and unpaid internships. Instead, she felt like a fraud, a disorganized mess who couldn't even manage the simple task of packing a charger. A tear of frustration pricked at the corner of her eye, and she swiped it away angrily. From a few feet away, Noah watched her. He'd been camped out by the only available outlet for the better part of an hour, a small fortress of technology humming around him. A laptop, a tablet, and 2 phones were all plugged into a multi-port adapter, their screens glowing with quiet efficiency. He was a cartographer of digital worlds, a freelance data analyst who could work from anywhere, yet often felt like he belonged nowhere. He recognized the look on the woman's face, not just the transient stress of travel, but something deeper, a bone-deep weariness. He'd seen it in the mirror enough times. "You look like someone who's carrying the weight of tomorrow on your shoulders," he said, his voice calm and even. Sophie looked up, startled. His eyes were kind, a soft hazel that seemed out of place in the harsh airport lighting. She gave a weak, self-deprecating laugh. "Is it that obvious? Right now I'd settle for just carrying the weight of a phone charger." Noah smiled, a genuine, unassuming expression that made the space between them feel a little less chaotic. He unplugged a sleek silver power bank from his setup. Its indicator light glowed a steady, reassuring green. "Here," he offered, holding it out. "Be my guest. It's fully charged." Sophie stared at the small device as if it were a holy relic. "Oh, I couldn't. You have a whole ecosystem there." "It's fine. Everything else is topped up. Think of it as a public service." He nudged it gently in her direction. "Sometimes the universe puts exactly what you need right in front of you." Hesitantly, she took it. The cool metal was solid in her trembling hand. "Thank you," she breathed, the words feeling inadequate. "Truly. You have no idea." As she fumbled to connect her phone, their fingers brushed, a fleeting electric touch that sent a surprising jolt through the exhaustion. Her phone chimed, the screen lighting up with the icon of a charging battery. The relief was so profound it was almost dizzying. "I'm Noah," he said, extending a hand. "Sophie." Her handshake was firm, a contradiction to the frantic energy she'd been radiating moments before. "So, what's in Chicago, Sophie? Or are you running away from something in Denver?" The question was direct, yet laced with a playful curiosity that disarmed her. "A little of both," she admitted, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "New job. I'm an urban planner. I want to build cities that feel like communities, not just grids of concrete and glass." Her passion, so often buried under layers of anxiety, surfaced effortlessly. She spoke of green spaces and public art, of creating places where people could connect, not just coexist. He listened, truly listened, with an attentiveness that made her feel seen. He told her about his own work, how he found stories in data, mapping human behaviour through clicks and algorithms. They bought coffee from the nearby kiosk, the steam rising between them like a fragile truce against the airport's sterile environment. They talked about their shared love for old maps, for the way cities breathe and change, for the feeling of being anonymous and yet part of something vast. For the first time all day, Sophie forgot to check her phone. She was absorbed in the rhythm of their conversation, in the way Noah's brow furrowed when he was deep in thought, in the easy laughter that passed between them. It felt less like a conversation between strangers and more like a reunion. Now boarding Flight 2317 to Chicago O'Hare, the announcement shattered the bubble they had built. The spell was broken. Sophie's heart sank. "That's me," she said, her voice small. "Right." Noah stood up as she gathered her scattered belongings, her movements now calm and purposeful. "The power bank," she said, disconnecting her phone, which now glowed a healthy 78%. "I need to give it back." "Keep it," he said quickly. "A welcome to Chicago gift." "I can't do that." "Sure you can. Pay it forward." Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze was the unspoken weight of the what if. What if this layover were longer? What if they weren't headed in the same direction, yet on entirely different paths? The air crackled with the potential of a story that was ending before it had a chance to begin. "Thank you, Noah," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. She clutched the power bank, its weight a tangible reminder of this fleeting, impossible connection. He just nodded, a lump forming in his own throat. He watched her merge with the line of travellers, a flash of her dark hair, a final glance back, and then she was gone, disappearing down the jet bridge. He stood there for a long time, the echo of her laughter still hanging in the air, the scent of her coffee mingling with the recycled atmosphere of Gate B23. He was surrounded by people, but for the first time in a long time, he felt utterly and completely alone. 6 weeks later, the city of Chicago glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lumina Gallery. The view was a breathtaking tapestry of light and ambition, a perfect reflection of the event unfolding within. It was a networking mixer for the city's rising stars in tech and design, and Noah felt like an imposter. He'd landed a lucrative contract with a major logistics firm, the kind of professional validation he'd been chasing for years. He had the sleek downtown apartment, the impressive title, the financial stability, yet a hollow echo followed him through the crowded rooms. He was adrift in his own success, a ship with a state-of-the-art navigation system but no destination in mind. He swirled the mediocre Cabernet in his glass, the clinking of ice and forced laughter a dull roar in his ears. He was charting data flows for a company that moved packages, but his own life felt static, stuck. His thoughts, as they often did in these quiet, lonely moments, drifted back to a fluorescent-lit gate in Denver, to a pair of panicked, intelligent eyes and a conversation that had felt more real than any he'd had since. He'd even found himself searching for her online, but Sophie, urban planner in a city of millions, was a needle in a digital haystack. It was a foolish, sentimental exercise, and he'd abandoned it after a few days. And then he saw her. She was standing across the room, bathed in the soft glow of a track light illuminating a large, abstract painting. But it wasn't the art that held him captive. It was her. The frantic energy from the airport was gone, replaced by a poised confidence that seemed to radiate from her very core. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, her hair swept up, a single silver necklace resting against her collarbone. She was laughing with a silver-haired man, her head tilted back, her smile lighting up that corner of the gallery. She was transformed. She was glowing. Noah's breath caught in his chest. It couldn't be, but it was. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humour. He started moving toward her, a man compelled by a force he didn't understand. He navigated the clusters of schmoozing professionals, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. As if sensing his approach, she turned. Her eyes scanned the crowd, a polite, distant smile on her face, until they landed on him. The smile faltered. Her eyes widened in stunned recognition. The glass she was holding slipped from her fingers, a slow-motion catastrophe of red wine splashing against the pristine white wall and the floor. "Oh, God!" she gasped, mortified. Noah was there in an instant, grabbing cocktail napkins from a passing server. "Some things never change," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her. "Still causing a scene in a public place." Sophie looked up at him, her face a mixture of embarrassment and utter disbelief. A breathless laugh escaped her lips. "Noah!" The name was a question, a confirmation, a miracle. "In the flesh." Together they mopped at the crimson stain, their hands brushing, the same spark igniting in the space between them. The silver-haired man, her boss, thankfully chuckled it off and moved on, leaving them in their own private, chaotic bubble. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I live here now," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "I could ask you the same thing, but I guess you made your flight." The intensity of the moment, the sheer improbability of it, was too much for the sterile gallery. "Let's get out of here," Sophie said, a sudden urgency in her voice. They found refuge in a small, dimly lit cafe around the corner, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans and the mellow sound of a jazz piano. The city traffic hummed outside, a distant counterpoint to the quiet intimacy of their table. They talked for hours, the 6 weeks since their first meeting melting away as if they were a dream. He learned that the first few weeks had been brutal. The movers were late, her apartment was smaller than it looked online, and a crippling sense of imposter syndrome had nearly sent her packing. She confessed that the airport encounter had become a strange source of strength. "I wondered if I'd imagined how kind your eyes were," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the scarred wooden tabletop. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out the silver power bank. She placed it carefully between them, a silent testament. "I carried this with me every day," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Like a talisman, a reminder that sometimes strangers can be kind, that things can work out." She looked up at him, her expression vulnerable and open. "That little battery didn't just charge my phone. It charged something in me I'd forgotten existed." Noah's carefully constructed walls of professional accomplishment and emotional distance crumbled. He saw past the poised woman from the gallery to the frantic, hopeful soul at the airport. He saw her strength, not in her newfound success, but in her willingness to admit her fear. He told her about his own emptiness, the feeling of being a ghost in his own life. The conversation was a mirror, each of them reflecting the other's hidden loneliness, their parallel journeys of ambition and isolation in a new city. He reached across the table, his fingers covering hers where they rested on the power bank. Its metal casing was cool, but their touch was warm. "Maybe we could charge each other for a while," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. Sophie's smile was like the dawn breaking over Lake Michigan. "I think I'd like that." The power bank sat between them, its small green light no longer just a symbol of a dead phone brought back to life, but a beacon of possibility, a signal, lost for a time, now found and shining brighter than all the city lights combined. The courtship that followed was painted in the warm, melancholic hues of a Chicago autumn. It wasn't a whirlwind of grand gestures, but a slow, deliberate exploration, like two old souls rediscovering a language they'd forgotten they knew. Their dates were conversations that spilled over hours. They walked along the shore of Lake Michigan, the waves a steady, rhythmic sigh against the sand. their shoulders brushing with a tentative electricity. They sought refuge from the crisp air in cosy labyrinthine bookstores, sharing whispered secrets between the stacks, the scent of old paper and ink their perfume. They found themselves on rooftop bars, the city sprawling beneath them like a circuit board of dreams, their silences as comfortable and meaningful as their words. With each passing day, the current between them ran deeper, pulling them into uncharted emotional waters. One blustery evening, curled in a booth at a neighbourhood pub, Sophie laid a piece of her fragile heart on the table. "I've spent so long being afraid of wanting too much that I forgot how to want anything at all," she confessed, her gaze fixed on the condensation trailing down her glass. She spoke of a childhood spent trying to be perfect, of believing she had to earn her place, of always feeling like she was the understudy in her own life. Noah listened, his chest aching with a painful recognition. He in turn offered a piece of his own brokenness. He told her about his pattern, a self-sabotaging cycle of emotional unavailability. He was the one who always left first, a preemptive strike against the possibility of being left. It was a defense mechanism honed over years, a fortress built around the ghost of a past relationship that had ended in a spectacular, painful flameout. "It's easier to be the one walking away," he admitted, his voice raw. "That way, you get to write the ending." That night, the air between them was thick with unspoken confessions and the potent promise of healing. He walked her home through a sudden thunderstorm, the sky splitting open with dramatic flashes of lightning. Rain plastered their clothes to their skin, and they laughed, feeling like the only two people in the world. Under the dim, protective glow of her apartment building's awning, the city noise faded to a distant hum. The scent of rain-soaked pavement filled the air. He leaned in, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. Her eyes fluttered shut. The kiss was a breath away, a promise hanging in the electrically charged air. But then she pulled back. A flicker of fear, of old habits, crossed her face. "I can't," she whispered, the word nearly stolen by a roll of thunder. "It's too soon. It's too much." Noah didn't push. He understood. He saw his own fear mirrored in her eyes. He simply nodded, his heart a heavy, sodden weight in his chest, and watched her disappear inside. The ghost he'd spoken of materialized a week later. Her name was Chloe. She was his ex-fiancée, the architect of his emotional unavailability. She'd heard he was in Chicago and had reached out, her text message a casual, devastating grenade. She wanted to meet for coffee, to catch up. Against his better judgment, driven by a misguided need for closure, he agreed. They met at a sterile coffee shop downtown. Chloe was just as he remembered, beautiful, sharp, and possessing an uncanny ability to make him feel like he was perpetually failing some unspoken test. She spoke of her regrets, of the mistakes she'd made, her words a carefully woven tapestry of nostalgia and subtle blame. She hinted at reconciliation, at the possibility of picking up the pieces. Noah felt the old patterns closing in, the familiar, suffocating comfort of a story he already knew the ending to. And from a table across the street, where she was grabbing her own afternoon coffee, Sophie saw them. She saw Noah's tense posture, the way Chloe reached across the table to touch his hand. She saw a history she wasn't a part of, a connection that predated her. It was a gut punch, a cold dose of reality that seemed to confirm her deepest fears. He wasn't a blank slate. He came with a past, a complicated, unresolved one. That evening, when he called, his voice strained. She was distant. "Is everything okay?" he asked, sensing the shift. "I saw you today," she said, her voice flat. With her, heavy scents stretched between them, thicker than the autumn fog rolling in off the lake. "Sophie, it's not what you think." "Isn't it?" she shot back, the hurt sharpening her words. You told me you run. You told me you have a pattern. Forgive me if this looks exactly like the beginning of your next departure. Her voice cracked on the last word. You don't get to be my exception and my patterns at the same time, Noah. You have to choose. The line went quiet, filled only by the static of their shared doubt. The deep, steady current that had been pulling them together had hit a snag, threatening to drag them both under. The argument hung between them for 3 days, a wall of wounded silence. Texts went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. Then on the 4th night, the city itself seemed to intervene. A massive storm, a true Midwestern behemoth, rolled in off the lake, knocking out power to half of downtown Chicago. Sophie's apartment plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of her laptop, the digital clock on the stove, all silenced. All that remained was the howl of the wind and the percussive drumming of rain against her windows. And then a knock, soft but insistent. Her heart leaped into her throat. She fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to navigate to the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw Noah's silhouette, his shoulders hunched against the gale. She opened the door. He was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face illuminated by the intermittent flashes of lightning. He held up a small paper bag. I brought candles, he said simply, and a peace offering. From the bag he produced 2 cannoli from their favourite bakery. She let him in without a word. Together, by the flickering light of a dozen small candles, they created a tiny island of warmth in the blacked-out city. The storm raged outside, but inside the world shrank to the 2 of them. The power outage had stripped away the distraction, the routines, the digital noise. There was nothing left but the truth. I was ending it, Noah said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the silence, with Chloe, for good. It was a conversation I should have had years ago. I'm sorry you had to see it. I'm sorry I made you doubt. In the soft, forgiving candlelight, Sophie's defences began to melt. The flickering flames danced in his eyes, and she saw not a man planning his escape, but someone fighting to stay. The intimacy of the moment, the raw, elemental nature of the storm made her brave. It's not you I doubt, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. It's the role. I'm so tired of being the person someone chooses after they've figured things out. I want to be the reason they figure it out. She finally gave voice to her deepest fear, the one that had haunted her for years. I am terrified that I am fundamentally unworthy of being chosen first. Sophie. He moved closer, his hand finding hers in the dim light. Her skin was cold. Look at me. He waited until her glistening eyes met his. In the dark, I can finally see who I really am, with you. I'm not that guy anymore, the one who runs. With you, all I want to do is run towards something. He leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. His lips met hers, a kiss that was both a question and an answer. It was tender and desperate, a release of all the tension and fear that had held them captive. It was a power surge of pure emotion, lighting up the darkness more profoundly than any electrical grid ever could. In that kiss, he confessed his love, not with grand promises, but with simple, profound presence. I love you, he murmured against her mouth. I'm different now. We are different. They stayed up all night, talking, sharing stories by candlelight as city sirens wailed in the distance. They made love on the rug in her living room, a slow, sacred act of rediscovery. For one perfect, honest night, they were unshackled from their pasts, their fears erased by a tide of passion and vulnerability. Morning arrived with a cruel grey light. The rain had stopped, and with it, the magic of the night seemed to recede. And then, the power flickered back on. Lights buzzed to life, the refrigerator hummed, and Noah's phone, which had been charging on the counter, pinged with the notification. He glanced at it, his face clouding over. It's from a headhunter, he said slowly, his voice sounding strange in the now bright room. A job offer. My dream job, actually. Lead data scientist for a green tech firm. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. It's in Portland. The words hit Sophie like a physical blow. Portland. It wasn't a neighbouring suburb, it was a continent away, a new city, a departure. The timing was so brutally perfect it felt like a cosmic joke. All her fears, all her doubts came rushing back, a tidal wave of insecurity. This wasn't a new beginning. It was the oldest story in the book. It was abandonment disguised as opportunity. Her walls didn't just go back up, they slammed into place, reinforced with steel. Of course it is, she said, her voice dripping with a cold, bitter irony. You're asking me to believe you've changed, to believe in this. She gestured between them. You're asking me to believe in something I've watched fail over and over again, not just with you, but in my whole life. Sophie, it's not like that. This is different. We can figure it out. How? She cried, her voice breaking. With long-distance calls and holiday visits. I won't do it, Noah. I won't be the woman waiting by the phone hoping I'm still the dream when you're living a new one thousands of miles away. The beautiful, honest intimacy of the night before had shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces. They parted with angry, wounded words, the kind you can't take back. He grabbed his jacket, his face a mask of hurt and confusion, and left. Hours later, after the tears had finally stopped, Sophie saw it. Sitting on her kitchen counter, forgotten in his hasty retreat, was the silver power bank. Its small green light glowed steadily, still charged, a silent mocking witness to the wreckage. 2 weeks, 14 days of suffocating sequence, 14 nights. Sophie had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, the ghost of candlelight flickering behind her eyelids. She'd gone through the motions, work, meetings, sketching out plans for a new park revitalisation project. But her heart felt like a blacked-out city, cold and silent. The power bank sat on her nightstand, its steady green light a constant, painful reminder of what she'd lost. It was a symbol of their beginning, and now it felt like an epitaph for their end. She'd been so sure she was right, so convinced she was protecting herself. But as the days bled into one another, a different truth began to surface. Her fear hadn't protected her. It had imprisoned her. She had slammed the door on the one person who had ever truly seen her, not because of what he'd done, but because of what she was afraid he might do. She had let the ghosts of her past dictate her future. The realization was a painful, clarifying dawn. She had to fight, not for him to choose her, but for her to choose herself, the version of herself that was brave enough to trust. She booked a flight. Meanwhile, at Denver International Airport, Noah sat at gate B23. The universe didn't just have a wicked sense of humour, it was a full-blown trickster god. His connecting flight to Portland was delayed. He stared out at the tarmac, the boarding pass in his hand feeling like a death sentence. He had taken the job. It was the logical choice, the next step on his carefully planned career trajectory. It was what the old Noah would have done without a second thought. But he wasn't the old Noah. The old Noah wouldn't be feeling this hollow, this gut-wrenchingly wrong. He had spent the last 2 weeks replaying that morning in Sophie's apartment, the hurt and fear in her eyes. He understood it. He'd given her every reason to doubt him. His whole life had been a training ground for her skepticism. But the night in the dark, the honesty, the feeling of finally truly arriving somewhere, that was the only data that mattered now. What was a dream job if it meant waking up alone? He pulled out his phone and typed a message to the headhunter in Portland, his fingers moving with a certainty that had eluded him for years. Thank you again for the incredible opportunity, but I have to respectfully withdraw my acceptance. He pressed send, just as a voice, hesitant and breathless, said his name. Noah? He looked up, and there she was, Sophie, standing in the middle of gate B23, looking just as lost and overwhelmed as she had the first time they'd met. She was holding out his power bank. He stood up slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Sophie, what are you doing here?" "Returning this," she said, her voice trembling. She placed the silver device in his hand. Their fingers brushed and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Turns out I didn't need it anymore. I finally figured out how to charge myself." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I realized that all this time I've been looking for someone to complete me, when what I needed was someone to choose me, every day, actively, intentionally. But I also realized I had to be brave enough to do the choosing too. And I choose you, Noah. Even if it's messy, even if it's scary, I choose the... Tears welled in his eyes as he looked from her brave, beautiful face to the boarding pass in his other hand. He ripped it in half, the sound a clean, decisive tear in the fabric of his old life. "You're a little late," he said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. "I already chose you too." He showed her the sent message on his phone. "I turned down the job. I'm staying in Chicago. Some connections are too rare to sacrifice for a better view." The relief that washed over Sophie was so profound she felt weak in the knees. "We keep ending up in airports together," she whispered, a laugh bubbling up through her tears. "Maybe the universe is trying to tell us something about new departures." "Or," he said, closing the distance between them and framing her face with his hands, "maybe it's trying to tell us we're finally home." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of gate B23, amidst the fluorescent buzz and the boarding calls for other places. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion or desperate relief, but one of quiet, profound certainty. It was a promise. The familiar chime of a final boarding call for Portland went unnoticed. He held up the power bank, its weight familiar and freighted with new meaning. "I think this is yours, actually," he said. "You're the one who jump-started everything." She smiled, her eyes shining. "We'll share it." They walked away from the gate, hand in hand, leaving the ripped boarding pass on an empty seat. They weren't running toward a destination on a map, but toward the beautiful, uncertain, and gloriously charged territory of a life they would build together. In a world obsessed with staying connected, they had discovered that the most powerful charge doesn't come from a wall outlet. It comes from two people brave enough to plug into each other's hearts, knowing that real love isn't about keeping your battery at 100%, but about finding someone worth sharing your last percentage with. The Prince and the Pen Pal. The world felt muted to Lena Reynolds, the vibrant hues of her life having faded to sepia after her engagement ended. Her fiancé, a man with burgeoning political ambitions, had called her too ordinary, words that had echoed in the hollow spaces of her small New Jersey apartment for months. It was her colleague, a cheerful history teacher named Maria, who had pushed the application into her hands. Global Pen Pals, the flyer read, a bridge of words across oceans. "You have a beautiful soul, Lena," Maria had insisted. "Let someone discover it without any local baggage." So, on a crisp October evening, with a mug of cinnamon tea steaming beside her, Lena sat down to write her first letter. She chose a simple cream-coloured notepaper, one of the few things she'd bought for herself since the breakup. Her apartment, a cosy haven walled in by towering bookshelves, was quiet around her. The scent of old paper and brewing tea was a comforting balm. She looked out the window at the familiar suburban street, the sodium lamps casting a lonely orange glow. "Dear friend," she began, the scratch of her pen a small sound against the silence. "I've always believed you can know someone's soul by how they describe the view from their window. Mine is quiet, It's a street in a small town in New Jersey, where neighbours still wave and the biggest event of the week is high school football. It's simple, perhaps, but there's a certain peace in the predictability of it all. I'm a literature teacher. I spend my days trying to convince teenagers that words written centuries ago still matter. Sometimes I even succeed. Across the Atlantic, in a minimalist royal study in the heart of a European capital, Crown Prince Leopold adjusted the priceless signet ring on his finger. The room was a testament to his public life. Stark, elegant, and devoid of personal clutter, save for a few leather-bound architecture books tucked away on a low shelf and a small framed photo of a rugged coastline hidden behind a stack of official documents. He had stumbled upon the pen pal program during a late-night search for architectural forums, a desperate anonymous click in a life that was anything but. Every handshake, every conversation, every curated smile was filtered through the lens of his title. He was a prince first, a man second. He yearned for one relationship that wasn't a negotiation of power or a reflection of his crown. Using a pseudonym, Leo, and listing his profession as an architecture student, he'd enrolled, a quiet act of rebellion. He'd been paired with a literature teacher from America. Her first letter arrived on heavy official stationery, forwarded through a discreet service he'd arranged. He slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, a gift from a visiting dignitary. The paper inside wasn't what he expected. It was soft, almost warm to the touch, and her handwriting was a series of elegant, forward-leaning loops. He read her words about the view from her window, and a smile, a genuine, unpracticed smile, touched his lips. He walked to his own floor-to-ceiling window, which overlooked the meticulously manicured palace gardens, a symphony of geometric precision and botanical perfection. Beyond the walls lay the ancient city, a tapestry of spires and rooftops he was destined to rule. "Lena," he wrote back, using a simple, unadorned fountain pen on thick, expensive stationery he'd purchased himself for this purpose. "The view from my window is one of overwhelming history. I see stone walls that have stood for centuries and towers that have watched generations of my family pass. I am a student of architecture, and my passion is understanding how these structures were built, not just with stone, but with purpose and ambition. You asked about my soul. I think it's hidden in the blueprints, in the spaces between the stone, in the silent stories buildings tell. You teach that old words matter. I believe old stones do too." He carefully avoided any details that would betray him. The scent of beeswax from the polished floors, the distant muffled sound of the changing of the guard, the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. Their correspondence became a lifeline for them both. They exchanged letters weekly, a slow, deliberate courtship of minds. Lena wrote about the fierce, unexpected beauty of a Sylvia Plath poem, of a student who finally understood the Great Gatsby's longing. She described the scent of old paper and glue in the library, the satisfying heft of a well-loved hardcover. Leo, in turn, wrote with breathtaking passion about the flying buttresses of Notre Dame, the impossible dome of the Pantheon, the genius of Gothic arches that reached for the heavens. He described the cold, smooth feel of marble under his fingertips, and the way sunlight filtering through a stained glass window could feel like a divine presence. He told her about his dream of designing not palaces, but public spaces, libraries, museums, places that belong to everyone. They built a world together, a secret kingdom made of ink and paper. Lena found herself checking the mail with a flutter of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. She would save his letters, reading them in the evening with her tea, his words painting pictures of a Europe she'd only seen in books. He was witty, intelligent, and carried a subtle melancholy she found herself wanting to soothe. Leo kept her letters in a locked drawer in his study. They were a burst of colour in his monochrome existence. Her observations were so beautifully, refreshingly ordinary. She wrote of grocery shopping and grading papers, of autumn leaves and the first snowfall. She was real, a vibrant soul living a life untouched by protocol or pretense. He felt more himself in his replies to her than he ever did in the gilded halls of his home. One rainy November night, Lena confessed, "I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but my favourite scent is petrichor, the smell of rain on dry earth. It smells like a fresh start." Leo read the line and closed his eyes, inhaling the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere of his study. He longed for something as simple and profound as the smell of rain. He was a prince surrounded by every luxury imaginable, yet he felt a pang of envy for a small-town teacher who could find such poetry in a downpour. It was in that moment he knew his anonymous correspondence had become something more. He was no longer just curious, he was captivated, and he was terrified that the fragile, beautiful world they had built would be shattered by the one word he could never bring himself to write: Prince. 3 months of correspondence had woven a tapestry of intimacy so intricate that the distance between New Jersey and Europe felt like a mere technicality. The paper and ink had been imbued with a kind of magic, carrying not just words but confessions, dreams, and the subtle cadence of two souls learning to harmonize. The relationship was written in invisible ink, in the spaces between the lines where unspoken feelings resided. For Leo, life became a precarious balancing act. By day, he was Crown Prince Leopold, attending tedious council meetings, reviewing state documents, and smiling placidly at charity galas. His father, the king, was a man forged from duty and tradition, and the pressure on Leo was immense. He was expected to be a symbol, an unwavering pillar of the monarchy. But in the stolen hours of the night, he was simply Leo, an architecture enthusiast who found solace in the words of a woman he'd never met. He created a sanctuary for their connection in a secret garden on the palace grounds, a small overgrown alcove with a crumbling stone bench, forgotten by the royal gardeners. It was there he would read Lena's letters, the scent of wild jasmine a stark contrast to the formal rose gardens nearby. The ticking of the grandfather clock in his study became a countdown, each tick a second closer to the public announcement of his arranged betrothal to Princess Elise of a neighbouring principality, a political alliance that had been in the works since his birth. Lena's world, too, had shifted on its axis. Her weekends were now marked by a new ritual. She would drive to the coast, to a solitary lighthouse that stood sentinel over the Atlantic. She'd sit on the rocky shore, the sea breeze tangling her hair, and read Leo's latest letter. The lighthouse became a powerful symbol for her, a beacon of light cutting through the fog, a steady presence in a vast, uncertain expanse. It felt like him. He was her lighthouse. One crisp, windswept afternoon, emboldened by the liberating honesty their anonymity provided, Lena finally shared the story of her broken engagement. She didn't spare herself, writing of her own feelings of inadequacy, the sting of being deemed ordinary. "There's something freeing about confessing to someone who can't see your face," she wrote, her pen hesitating over the paper. "Sometimes I think we only become our true selves when nobody's watching." He wanted a partner who would shine beside him on a stage. I was always more comfortable in the audience, with a good book. Her vulnerability was a gut punch to Leo. He sat on his stone bench, her letter trembling slightly in his hand. He, who was never out of the public eye, who lived his entire existence on a stage, felt the bitter irony. He saw her pain and recognized a kinship in their prisons, hers of perceived ordinariness, his of gilded obligation. He wrote back immediately, his script more urgent than usual. "Lena, ordinariness is a far greater gift than you know. It is authentic. My life is complicated by family expectations. There is a path laid out for me, a role I am expected to play, and the man who writes you these letters is often at odds with the man the world sees. Your letters are the only place where I am not playing a part." He revealed the immense pressure he was under, the weight of a legacy, carefully cloaking it in the guise of a demanding family business, never daring to use the words crown or kingdom. The confession deepened their bond. They were two people trapped in lives that didn't fully fit, finding a perfect fit in each other. They discussed their fears, his of disappointing a father he both loved and resented, hers of never being truly seen for who she was. The turning point came on a cold, grey afternoon. The king had summoned Leo to the throne room, a place reserved for the most serious of matters. The air was heavy with the scent of old tapestries and the unspoken weight of lineage. His father, looking older and more tired than Leo had ever seen him, delivered the ultimatum. The engagement to Princess Ellie's would be formally announced in 1 month. It was not a request, it was a royal decree. The princess was already preparing to travel for the announcement ceremony. Leo felt the walls of his life closing in. The man he was with, Lena, the passionate, dreaming, authentic man, was about to be suffocated. That evening, standing at his study window watching the city lights twinkle into existence, he felt a surge of desperate rebellion. He couldn't lose her. He couldn't let Leo die without ever having truly lived. He pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery, his heart hammering against his ribs. The grandfather clock ticked ominously in the hall, each sound a reminder of the time he was running out of. His decision was impulsive, reckless, and utterly necessary. He wrote of a fictional architectural competition he was supposedly a finalist in, a competition that included a travel grant for a guest. It was a clumsy lie, but it was the only bridge he could think to build between his two worlds. Lena, he wrote, his pen flying across the page, this is perhaps the boldest thing I've ever done, but I must ask. The final stage of the competition is in my city. They have provided for me to bring one guest, someone whose perspective I value, who can offer inspiration. I know it is an impossible thing to ask. We are strangers, in a way, and yet I feel I know you better than anyone. Would you consider coming? I want to show you the buildings I've only been able to describe. I want to see the view from my window, with you standing next to me. He sealed the envelope, his hand unsteady. He was offering her a piece of his world, praying she wouldn't see the invisible ink bleeding through the page, the ink of secrets, of royalty, of a life that was about to collide with hers in the most spectacular and devastating way. He sent the letter, a message in a bottle cast into the vast ocean between them, and could only wait and hope. The journey felt like a dream. Lena held the heavy, cream-coloured envelope containing her plane ticket and a formally printed invitation to the Architectural Gilgala. The embossed crest at the top was intricate and unfamiliar, but she assumed it was the logo of the prestigious organisation Leo had mentioned. Her heart, a frantic hummingbird in her chest, hadn't stopped fluttering since she'd read his letter. Yes, it was crazy. Yes, she was flying across the world to meet a man she knew only through his words. But his words had rebuilt her. They had taken the fragments of her confidence and pieced them back together with the patient mortar of understanding and shared dreams. She had to go. The flight was a surreal haze of recycled air and nervous excitement. She reread his letters, his descriptions of the city's ancient stones and soaring spires, now a map to a man's soul. She imagined Leo, her humble, passionate architecture student. She pictured him with the ink stains on his fingers, maybe a pair of glasses pushed up on his forehead, his eyes lighting up as he pointed out the genius of a particular archway or facade. She imagined their meeting, a quiet, slightly awkward moment at a cafe or a bookstore, a slow smile of recognition, the relief of finally putting a face to the words that had become her sanctuary. The plane descended through a blanket of clouds, revealing a storybook city nestled along a winding river, a landscape of terracotta roofs and majestic ivory-coloured buildings. It was even more beautiful than he had described. As she disembarked and made her way through the bustling terminal, a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit holding a sign bearing her name approached her. "Miss Reynolds?" he inquired, his voice polite but formal. I'm here to escort you." Lena, slightly flustered, but assuming he was a car service arranged by the guild, followed him to a sleek black sedan parked in a restricted area. The luxury of the vehicle was her first prickle of unease. As they drove, the city unfolded around her, grand and imposing. They didn't head towards a quaint student-friendly neighbourhood. Instead, they drove through ornate iron gates, past uniformed guards who snapped to attention, and into the sprawling, impossibly grand grounds of a palace. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a university. This was a landmark. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice small. "The Architectural Guild. I'm here to meet a student." The driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "There is no mistake, miss." The car pulled to a stop before a grand portico, and a footman in livery opened her door. Her legs felt unsteady as she stepped out onto the gravel, her simple dress and cardigan suddenly feeling foolishly inadequate. And then she saw him. He was walking down the grand stone steps, not in the tweed jacket she'd imagined, but in a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of immense wealth and status. He was taller than she'd pictured, his bearing regal and confident. He was devastatingly handsome, but it was his eyes, the same intelligent, slightly melancholic eyes she felt she knew from his letters, that made her world tilt on its axis. As he reached the bottom step, 2 guards fell into step behind him. The truth crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow, the family business, the expectations, the historical view from his window. It wasn't a lie, it was an omission so profound it felt like the cruelest form of deception. He stopped before her, his face a mask of anxiety. "Lena," he breathed, and the sound of her name on his lips was both a balm and a wound. Disorienting sounds of ceremonial trumpets blared from a distant courtyard, announcing some formal procession. The whispers of courtiers, who had paused to watch the exchange from palace windows, felt like tiny needles against her skin. "Who are you?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them, heavy and sharp. "My name is Leopold," he said, his voice strained. "I wanted you to know me before you knew my title. Was that so wrong?" The question ignited a firestorm of hurt and betrayal inside her. "You had all of me," she retorted, her voice trembling with the effort to keep from shouting. "My real name, my job, my fears, my hometown. You had all of my ordinary, simple truth, and I had only a piece of you, a character you invented." She turned, her only instinct to flee, to erase this grand, terrifying reality and retreat back to the safety of her quiet life. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from him, from the suffocating grandeur of his lie. She stumbled through an archway and found herself in a magnificent garden maze, the hedges towering over her, the scent of thousands of roses thick and cloying. She ran, taking random turns, the gravel crunching under her feet, tears blurring the perfect symmetry of the labyrinth. He followed her, calling her name. Finally, in a small circular clearing at the heart of the maze, he caught up to her, gently taking her arm. They were surrounded by blooming roses, a cage of impossible beauty, but there was no clear way out. The setting was a perfect cruel mirror of their situation. "Lena, please," he pleaded, his eyes filled with a desperation she had read in his letters, but never expected to see. "The man who wrote you those letters, that was me. That is the most real version of me." "The real you is a prince," she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "And you let me fall in love with a ghost." She pulled her arm away, the weight of the formal invitation still in her purse, a mocking reminder of how naively she had walked into this gilded cage. The man she had crossed an ocean for didn't exist, and the one standing before her was a stranger who lived in a world where she could never belong. The days that followed were a surreal blend of opulence and heartache. Lena was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment, with silk wallpaper, antique furniture, and a balcony overlooking the city. It felt less like a guest room and more like a beautifully appointed prison. Leo, caught between his royal obligations and his desperate need to explain, tried to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. He took her to the royal library, a magnificent 2-story rotunda smelling of aged leather and beeswax. "This is where I wrote to you most nights," he said, his voice soft. He showed her a hidden alcove with a comfortable-looking chair. "I imagined you here, curled up with a book, telling me what you thought of it." For a moment the prince receded, and she saw Leo, her pen pal, the man who loved the quiet stories of old buildings. But the moment was fleeting, shattered by the arrival of an aide with an urgent message from the king. Their time was a series of stolen moments, fragmented and shadowed by his public life. He would find her on a deserted terrace for a whispered conversation, only to be whisked away for a diplomatic reception. They were surrounded by priceless art and centuries of history, yet the only thing that felt real was the raw, unspoken tension that vibrated between them. The suffocating tightness of the formal gowns they provided for her mirrored the constriction in her chest. The emotional climax of this strange, suspended reality came at a grand state ball. Dressed in an emerald green gown she couldn't believe was hers, Lena felt like an imposter. The ballroom was a dizzying kaleidoscope of crystal chandeliers, orchestral music, and glittering jewels. And across the room she saw him. He was standing beside a strikingly beautiful woman with an aristocratic air and a practiced smile. Her name was Princess Elise, and Lena knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was the woman he was meant to marry. Elise's eyes, sharp and intelligent, found Lena in the crowd. She leaned over and whispered something to Leo. His gaze snapped to Lena, a look of profound apology and helplessness in his eyes. Later, as a sudden, violent rainstorm lashed against the palace windows, Leo found Lena on a rain-drenched balcony, the distant sound of the orchestra a melancholic counterpoint to the drumming of the rain. "You should have told me about her," Lena said, not looking at him, her voice barely audible over the storm. "It wasn't my choice," he replied, his voice ragged. "It's an arrangement, a treaty. It has nothing to do with what I feel." "And what do you feel?" she challenged, finally turning to face him. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and rainwater dripped from the stone balustrade like tears. "In your letters, you were never the teacher, and I was never the prince," he said, stepping closer, his presence a magnetic pull she fought to resist. "We were just two people who found each other across an ocean. Can't we find our way back there?" "Back to the lie?" she asked, her heart aching. "That place doesn't exist anymore, Leo. We're here, in your world, and in this world, I'm the ordinary girl from New Jersey, and you are a prince about to be betrothed to a princess." Before he could answer, a palace guard appeared at the doorway, his expression grim. "Your Highness, you are needed. There has been a crisis. A dam has broken in the Northern Territories." The change in Leo was instantaneous. The conflicted man vanished, replaced by a leader. His voice became crisp, authoritative, as he issued a rapid series of commands. He turned back to Lena, his eyes filled with a new, urgent intensity. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. He took her to the palace's emergency command center. For hours she watched as he coordinated relief efforts, his focus absolute. He was compassionate, speaking with genuine concern to engineers and local officials. He was decisive, making difficult choices with a wisdom that seemed beyond his years. He wasn't just playing a part, he was serving his people with a fierce dedication she couldn't help but admire. She saw the weight of his crown not as a privilege, but as a profound responsibility that he carried with grace and strength. She was witnessing the man behind the title, the leader he was born to be, and in that crowded, chaotic room, Amidst the crackle of radios and the urgent murmur of voices, Lena began to understand. The Leo she had fallen for in the letters, the passionate, thoughtful man who dreamed of building things that mattered, was not a fiction. He was right here, building something far more important than a library or a museum. He was holding his kingdom together, and her heart, which she had tried so hard to shield, broke open with a reluctant, painful understanding. She loved the prince as much as she had loved the pen pal. The day of the betrothal announcement dawned grey and heavy, the sky the colour of slate. The palace buzzed with a solemn ceremonial energy. In the royal chapel, flowers were being arranged, and a velvet-draped table was set up at the front, awaiting the signing of the official documents that would bind 2 nations and 2 people. Lena stood by the window of her suite, looking down at the lighthouse-like spire of the city's oldest cathedral. It seemed to be mocking her, a beacon that had guided her here only to abandon her in the fog of an impossible situation. Leo had sent her a note that morning, delivered by a trusted footman. "Meet me in the old observatory at noon, please." She found him in the dusty, silent room at the top of the palace's north tower. Antique telescopes pointed towards the obscured sky, silent witnesses to centuries of cosmic events. Leo stood near a large celestial globe, his fingers tracing the painted continents. He looked exhausted, the weight of his impending decision etched on his face. He was dressed in his full formal uniform, the medals and sash a stark reminder of the duty that imprisoned him. "My father collapsed this morning," he said, his voice flat. "His heart. The doctors say the stress." He didn't need to finish. The implication was clear. If Leo defied tradition now, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for the monarchy, but for his family. "So you're going through with it?" Lena stated, her own heart a leaden weight in her chest. "I don't have a choice," he said, turning to her, his eyes pleading for her to understand. "My kingdom needs this alliance. My father needs this peace." "I do understand," she said, and the sincerity in her voice surprised them both. "I saw you during the flooding. I saw the leader you are. Your people need you. I would never ask you to choose me over them." It was the hardest truth she had ever spoken, a sacrifice that tore at the very fabric of her being. He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands. His touch was electric, a desperate final connection. "But I love you, Lena. Loving you has made me a better man, a better leader. You taught me the value of authenticity, something the palace has tried to beat out of me my entire life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his signet ring, the one bearing the royal crest. He pressed it into her palm. "This represents the kingdom I was born to rule," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The metal was heavy, a tangible symbol of his burden. "And there is another kingdom, the one we built, with paper and ink, with honesty and vulnerability, is just as real, just as important to me." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps there's a way to honour both kingdoms, the one I was born to rule and the one we've built between us." A plan began to form in his eyes, a flicker of the rebellious student she knew, now tempered with the wisdom of a king. "Tradition is not a cage. It's a foundation," he murmured, almost to himself, echoing a sentiment from one of his earliest letters. "And foundations can be built upon." Down in the chapel the court had assembled. Princess Elise stood beside her father, looking serene and regal. The king, against doctor's orders, was seated, looking frail but determined. The moment arrived. Leo strode into the chapel, not with Lena, but alone. He walked to the front, his posture erect, his face resolute. He took a deep breath and addressed the assembly. He spoke of duty, of tradition, of his love for his country. He honoured the proposed alliance and spoke of Princess Elise with respect and admiration. Then he paused. "However," he continued, his voice ringing with newfound authority, "the world is changing, and our monarchy must change with it. True leadership is not about sacrificing personal happiness for public duty, but about integrating them. It is about being an authentic leader. He announced that he would honour the spirit of the alliance with Princess Elise's nation, creating stronger economic and cultural ties, but he would not and could not enter into a marriage devoid of love. He spoke of a new vision, one where his future partner would be a true partner, someone who understood both the common person and the crown. Then he looked directly toward the back of the chapel where Lena had slipped in, her heart pounding. I have come to know a woman whose ordinary perspective is, in fact, the most extraordinary gift. A woman who has shown me that a kingdom's greatest strength is its connection to the people. He didn't say her name, but every person in the room felt the seismic shift in the monarchy's foundation. The resolution was not a fairy tale ending, but something more real, more earned. It was a compromise. In the months that followed, Leo, with Elise's surprising support, for she too longed for a life of her own choosing, renegotiated the terms of their nation's relationship. He began to modernize certain royal protocols, creating a charitable foundation focused on global literacy and cultural exchange, and he asked Lena to help lead it. 6 months later, Lena stood at the base of the lighthouse in New Jersey. The fog was thick, but the powerful beam cut through it, illuminating a path across the water. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her and turned. It was Leo, dressed in simple trousers and a sweater, looking like the man she had first imagined. He held out his hand. In his palm was not the royal signet ring, but a simple antique key. It's to the door of the Royal Library's new public wing, he said. The one you helped me design. She placed her hand in his, their fingers lacing together. The ocean still stretched between their two worlds, but it was no longer a barrier. It was just water, and they had built a bridge. Some love stories are written in the stars, others in royal decrees, but theirs began with ink on paper, imperfect, smudged at times, but entirely ours. And perhaps that's the most royal thing of all. Two people choosing each other, again and again, across every border and boundary the world places between them. The lighthouse beam swept across them, a silent promise of a future they would write together, one authentic word at a time. Written in fireworks. The salt-laced wind of Bluewater Beach, Massachusetts, carried the familiar symphony of a 4th of July sunset. Laughter from nearby families, the sizzle of a distant grill, the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. It was a soundscape Lily Morgan knew by heart. At 58, she had seen this scene unfold more times than she could count. She sat on a faded patchwork blanket, a relic of family vacations past, and watched her two grown children, Maya and Ben, bicker good-naturedly while setting up camp chairs. They were good kids, with kind hearts and lives of their own, yet a strange and persistent sense of detachment settled over her, as fine and cool as the evening mist rolling in off the Atlantic. This year felt different. The nostalgia that usually warmed her was tinged with a peculiar melancholy. 40 years, she did the math again, a silent, reflexive habit that returned every summer. 40 years since the bicentennial. The setting sun cast a molten gold path across the water, and as the sky deepened to bruised purple, the present dissolved. The scent of coconut sunscreen and cheap beer was replaced by the sweeter aroma of Coppertone and tab soda. The tinny echo of a portable radio playing disco morphed into the full-throated celebration of 1976. July 4th, 1976. Lily, 18 and shimmering with the nervous energy of youth, slipped away from her parents' boisterous beach party. Their friends, loud and flushed with patriotic fervour, were debating politics, while she felt a universe of feeling coiling in her chest, too vast and undefined for their small talk. She needed air. She needed a moment that was her own. Ducking under the boardwalk felt like entering a secret world. The roar of the crowd above became a muffled rhythmic thunder. The setting sun striped the sand between the thick wooden planks, casting the space in a cathedral-like twilight. She wasn't alone. A boy was leaning against a pylon, his back to her, silhouetted against the glittering sea. He was tall, with a sweep of dark hair that fell across his brow. He turned at the crunch of her bare feet in the sand, and his eyes, a startling shade of green even in the dim light, widened slightly. "Sorry," she'd mumbled. "I thought I was the only one hiding." A slow smile spread across his face, instantly crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Best hiding spot on the beach. You can hear the world without having to be in it." His name was Daniel. He was from a town a few hours away visiting his grandparents. She was Lily, a local about to start college in the fall. They talked for what felt like minutes and hours. They didn't speak of the things teenagers usually did, school, sports, gossip. Instead, they spoke of the things that truly mattered. He dreamt of building things, structures that would last, while she dreamt of filling blank pages with stories that would move people. They talked about the future as if it were a tangible place they could map out together, there in the cool, quiet dark. The first firework was an unexpected cannon shot that made them both jump. Through the gaps in the boardwalk, they watched the sky ignite. Bursts of sapphire, ruby, and glittering gold bloomed and wept across the velvet darkness. It was the grand finale of the bicentennial display, a spectacle of unprecedented scale. As a particularly magnificent explosion of white glitter cascaded downwards, bathing their hideaway in a strobe of otherworldly light, he turned to her. The world went silent. She saw her own wonder reflected in his eyes. He leaned in, his hand coming up to gently cup her jaw, and kissed her. It wasn't a fumbling teenage kiss. It was a kiss of startling certainty, a moment of profound recognition. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. When they finally broke apart, breathless, the sky was raining down its final embers. "It's like the sky itself is celebrating what we'd found," he'd whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that mirrored her own. "Meet me tomorrow," he said, his hand still warm on her skin. "Noon, by the lighthouse. Don't be late. I'll be there," she promised, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, but he never came. She had waited for 2 hours, her hope slowly souring into a hollow ache of confusion and rejection that would subtly colour her life for years to come. She never even learned his last name. "Mom, you okay?" Maya's voice sliced through the decades, pulling Lily back to the present. Lily blinked, the ghost of that kiss still tingling on her lips. The ache was no longer sharp, but a dull, familiar throb. "Fine, honey. Just thinking." She forced a smile. "You looked 1,000,000 miles away," Ben added, handing her a bottle of water. 1,000,000 miles. 40 years. "How did that happen?" she whispered to herself, the words stolen by the wind. She got to her feet, brushing sand from her capri. The sun had completely vanished now, leaving behind a sky of deepening twilight. "I'm just going for a little walk," she announced, her voice steadier than she felt. "Before the show starts." She didn't wait for their questions. Her feet, acting on an instinct older than her own children, turned her not towards the crowded pier, but down the beach towards the solitary stoic silhouette of the old Blue Water lighthouse, its beacon just beginning to sweep across the darkening water. The path to the lighthouse was quieter, a gentle ascent away from the boisterous energy of the main beach. A string of festive lights had been wound through the gnarled branches of the scrub pines, casting a soft, intermittent glow. From a beachfront restaurant below, the soulful, melancholic notes of a saxophone drifted on the breeze, a lonely counterpoint to the distant pop and fizzle of amateur fireworks. Lily walked slowly, her sandals scuffing against the sandy asphalt, her heart beating with a strange, anticipatory rhythm she couldn't explain. It was foolish, this pilgrimage. a sentimental journey into a memory. Halfway up the path, a lone figure sat on a memorial bench overlooking the water. Even in the deepening dusk, the profile was unmistakable. The set of the shoulders, the angle of the head as he gazed out at the horizon. It was a silhouette etched into the most private corners of her memory. His hair was silver now, catching the faint light from the distant pier, but the shape of him, the quiet intensity of his stillness, was the same. Lily stopped dead, her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful snag. It couldn't be. After all this time, it was impossible. It was a trick of the light, a projection of her own wistful imagination. And yet she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, she knew. How many times had she imagined this moment? In her 20s with defiant anger, in her 30s with a sad romantic curiosity, in her 40s with the weary resignation that some doors were meant to stay closed. And now, at 58, it was happening on a random Tuesday in July, and all she could feel was a profound, paralysing shock. He must have sensed her presence. He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping from the ocean toward her. His eyes, still that same startling green, met hers across the 20 feet of charged space. There was a flicker of casual curiosity, the kind you give a stranger passing by, and then it happened. A jolt, a visible physical reaction. His posture straightened, his brows furrowed in disbelief, a slow, dawning comprehension washing over his features like the incoming tide. The saxophone music faded. The chatter of the distant crowd disappeared. The world narrowed to this single, impossible point of connection. She was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper carried on the salty air. "You never came back." It wasn't an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, a truth that had shaped the landscape of her heart for 4 decades. He stood up, his movements stiff as if his body had forgotten how to work. He took a hesitant step toward her. "Lily." The name was a question, a breath of disbelief. She nodded, unable to form another word. His voice broke thick with an emotion she couldn't decipher. He cleared his throat and tried again. "My father had a heart attack that night, right after the fireworks. We got the call from my grandmother. We left for the hospital in Boston before dawn." He raked a hand through his silver hair, a gesture of pure, unadulterated distress. "I never got your last name. I didn't know your address. I came back the next summer, and the one after that. I asked around. No one knew who I was talking about. For years I tried to find you." The story, so simple and so devastating, landed in the space between them, extinguishing the faint, lingering embers of her teenage resentment and replacing them with a hollow echo of shared loss. All those years she'd thought of it as her abandonment. It had never occurred to her that it was his tragedy. The awkwardness of the moment was immense, a chasm of 40 years of unlived life. They filled it with the clumsy, necessary architecture of small talk. He was Daniel Reynolds, an architect, just as he'd dreamed. He'd married a woman named Beth, a wonderful woman. They had 2 daughters. He'd lost Beth to cancer 5 years ago. She was Lily Morgan. She hadn't become a famous novelist, but a high school English teacher who, she hoped, had at least inspired a few kids to love stories. She'd married Tom, raised Maya and Ben. She and Tom had divorced 3 years prior. They were strangers, their lives full of people and places the other had never known. And yet, beneath the polite exchange of biographical data, the original current still hummed, a low, powerful frequency that had never truly gone silent. As true darkness finally fell, they began to walk instinctively, side by side but not to touching, back down the path toward the gathering crowd. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the ghosts of the lives they might have lived. Suddenly, the first official firework of the night screamed into the sky. A percussive thump shook the air, followed by a brilliant explosion of chrysanthemum white light directly overhead. They both stopped and looked up, their faces illuminated in the same fleeting spectacular glow. For a dizzying second, time collapsed. They were 18 again, standing on the precipice of everything, the sky exploding just for them. The light faded, plunging them back into darkness, but the image remained, seared into Lily's mind. His face older, lined with life and loss, but his eyes holding the very same wonder she remembered from a lifetime ago. The following afternoon the sky wept. A steady, gentle rain pattered against the large picture windows of the Salty Dog Cafe, blurring the view of the beach into a watercolour of muted greys and blues. Inside, the cafe was a warm, intimate cocoon smelling of coffee beans and cinnamon. The rain provided a perfect excuse, a neutral ground where the charged atmosphere of the previous night could settle. Lily and Daniel sat across from each other in a worn wooden booth, ceramic mugs warming their hands. For 2 hours they unspooled the tapestry of their lives, weaving the threads of 4 decades into a shared story. He pulled out his phone to show her photos of his daughters, Amelia and Chloe, one a lawyer in New York, the other a landscape designer in Oregon. He spoke of his late wife Beth with a quiet, reverent affection that brought a lump to Lily's throat. He described the buildings he had designed, his pride evident in the way his hands moved, sketching invisible lines in the air. Lily in turn shared snapshots of Maya and Ben, from gap-toothed school pictures to their recent college graduations. She spoke of her teaching career, the challenges and the triumphs, the faces of students she would never forget. And then, hesitantly, she spoke of her divorce. It wasn't one big thing, she confessed, staring into her coffee. It was a slow erosion. Tom, he found someone else, but if I'm being honest, he'd been gone a long time before that. And I had been too. She looked up, her gaze direct and vulnerable. Sometimes I feel like I'm just playing a part, mother, teacher, ex-wife. I feel like I lost track of just being Lily somewhere along the way. Daniel nodded, a deep, knowing sadness in his eyes. After Beth died, the silence in the house was deafening. I realised I'd built my entire identity around being her husband, the girl's father. I was a partner in a firm, a pillar of the community, but when the pillar you're leaning against is gone... He trailed off, his gaze distant. I'm still trying to find the pieces of myself in the rubble. In that shared confession, the 40 years between them seemed to shrink, the chasm of their separate lives bridged by a common, deeply human experience of loss and reinvention. They weren't just the ghosts of 2 teenagers under a boardwalk anymore. They were 2 adults, weathered by life, recognizing their own scars in the other. As she spoke, she reached for the sugar dispenser at the same moment he did. The backs of their hands brushed against each other, a fleeting, incidental contact. But it was not incidental. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up Lily's arm, a physical manifestation of the current that had been humming beneath the surface since she'd first seen him on the path. They both pulled back instantly, a blush rising on Lily's cheeks. The air crackled with the sudden, undeniable awareness of now, not just then. Daniel flustered, cleared his throat and fumbled for his wallet. "I wanted to show you something," he said, his voice a little strained. He carefully extracted a worn, folded piece of paper from a hidden flap. He unfolded it with a reverence that made Lily's heart ache. It was a ticket stub, faded and soft with age. Across the top she could just make out the words, US Bicentennial Grand Finale, Fireworks Display, July 4th, 1976. "I've kept this for 40 years, he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the fragile paper. It was my one perfect night, a reminder that a night like that was even possible. Lily stared at the ticket, this tangible proof of her own memory, and felt the last wall around her heart begin to crumble. Before she could find the words to respond, her phone buzzed on the table, a jarring intrusion of the present. It was Maya. "Mom, where are you? We're all getting together for dinner at the Clam Shack. Ben's treat." Reality rushed back in. She had a family, a life, obligations that existed outside this rainy cafe cocoon. "I have to go," she said, a reluctance heavy in her voice. "Of course," Daniel said, quickly tucking the ticket away. They stood, the awkwardness returning. "I'm here until Sunday," he offered. "Maybe we could see the final fireworks display tomorrow night. Together." "I'd like that," Lily said, a genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. She turned and walked to the door, pulling up the hood of her raincoat. As she stepped out into the misty rain, something made her glance back. Through the rain-streaked window, Daniel was still standing by the booth, watching her go, and on his face was an expression of such quiet, profound longing that it mirrored the one she knew must be on her own. The air on Saturday evening was thick and unstable. The sun had set an hour ago, leaving behind a bruised, dramatic sky. Heavy dark clouds muscled their way in from the west, and a restless wind whipped across the beach, flapping flags and threatening to steal hats. Despite the ominous weather, the boardwalk was thronged with people, a holiday weekend crowd determined to squeeze the last drop of summer from the night. Lily arrived with Maya and Ben in tow, a nervous knot tightening in her stomach. They were more than sceptical, they were fiercely protective, their questions peppered with a loving concern that felt like a gentle interrogation. "A guy you met for 2 hours 40 years ago? Mum, are you sure about this?" Ben had asked. Daniel was waiting for them near the entrance to the pier, his silver hair ruffled by the wind. He wasn't alone. 2 young women stood with him, their faces a mixture of curiosity and a similar guarded protectiveness. They were unmistakably his daughters. The introductions were a masterclass in polite tension. Lily met Amelia and Chloe. Daniel met Maya and Ben. They all shook hands and exchanged pleasantries, their smiles tight, their eyes assessing. The 6 of them stood in a slightly awkward circle, a solar system of 2 families colliding. The silence was broken by Chloe, Daniel's younger daughter, who leaned toward her sister and whispered, just a little too loudly, "Dad barely even mentions Mum anymore, but he's talked about your mother non-stop for 2 days." The comment hung in the air, mortifying and illuminating in equal measure. A flush crept up Daniel's neck. Lily's own children exchanged a look. Seeking to diffuse the tension, Maya suggested they go find a spot to lay their blankets, a subtle act of separation. For a moment, Daniel and Lily were left alone in the churning river of the crowd. The wind whipped a strand of hair across Lily's face. Daniel reached out, his instinct faster than his thought, and gently tucked it behind her ear. His fingers grazed her temple, warm and firm. "I should have kissed you again," he said suddenly, his voice low and intense, cutting through the noise. "Yesterday, at the cafe, when our hands touched, I wanted to." Lily's heart hammered against her ribs. She opened her mouth to respond, to say "I wanted you to," but the words were stolen by a sudden collective gasp from the crowd. A fat, cold drop of rain hit her forehead, then another, and another. The threatened storm broke with a theatrical, almost violent suddenness. The sky opened up and a torrential downpour began, sending people shrieking and laughing as they scrambled for cover. The boardwalk became a chaotic exodus of panicked families gathering blankets and children. The fireworks were, without a doubt, cancelled. In the ensuing mayhem, they were separated. Lily was swept along with the surge of people heading for the parking lot. She called Daniel's name, but her voice was swallowed by the wind and the drumming rain. She lost sight of her own kids. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. Acting on a primal half-conscious instinct, she broke away from the fleeing crowd and ran, ducking under the familiar, cavernous shelter of the boardwalk. It was the same section. She knew it instantly. The rain fell in solid, silvery sheets just beyond the edge of her refuge. The the roar on the wooden planks above a deafening drumbeat. Soaked, shivering and utterly alone, a wave of emotional crisis washed over her. The absurdity of it all hit her with the force of the storm. What was she doing? Chasing a memory, a feeling from when she was 18? She was a grown woman, a mother, an ex-wife standing in the rain and chasing a ghost. Was she trying to recapture a moment that was never meant to be more than that? A perfect singular flash in time? Lily! His voice cut through the roar. She spun around. Daniel appeared through the curtain of rain, his shirt plastered to his chest, his hair slicked to his head, looking as drenched and desperate as she felt. He strode toward her, his eyes locking on hers with an intensity that stopped her breath. "I won't lose you again," he said, his voice raw and ragged. "Not in a crowd, not in a storm, not this time." He didn't hesitate. He closed the remaining distance between them, cupped her face in his hands just as he had done a lifetime ago, and kissed her. It was not the tender, exploratory kiss of their youth. This was a kiss of 40 years of waiting, of questions and what-ifs, of loss and longing. It was hungry and desperate and certain all at once. It was the storm and the shelter. It was the collision of their past and the explosive, undeniable reality of their present. The 4 decades of silence between them dissolved in that single soul-shattering instant. 1 year later, July 4th, the sun, a benevolent orange orb, dipped towards the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of rose and gold. The air was warm and still, holding the promise of a perfect summer night. On the same stretch of Bluewater Beach, Lily leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, the familiar patchwork blanket spread beneath them. The scene was the same, yet everything was different. A comfortable distance away, their children mingled. The awkwardness of the previous year had softened into a tentative, evolving warmth. Lily watched as Daniel's older daughter Amelia showed Ben a photo on her phone, both of them laughing at something. Maya was in a deep conversation with Chloe about perennial flowers. It wasn't one big, perfectly blended family, not yet, but it was the start of something new. A constellation formed from the gravitational pull of 2 separate stars. Their year had been a whirlwind of logistics and emotion. It had been weekends spent driving the 3 hours between her home and his. It had been long phone calls late into the night, filling in the vast empty spaces of their 40-year separation. It had been the slow, careful process of introducing their histories, their friends, their favourite coffee mugs, the quiet sorrows they each carried. It was the gradual, beautiful merging of 2 lives that had run parallel for so long. "We're moving too fast," she teased, her voice a low murmur against his collarbone. "'Cause 41 years to get to this blanket." He chuckled, the sound a warm vibration that resonated through her. "I'm making up for lost time." He shifted, reaching into the canvas tote bag beside him. He pulled out a small velvet-wrapped box. Her heart gave a little flutter, even though they'd talked about it. They were in no rush. They were savouring this, the rediscovery. It wasn't a ring. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver pendant on a thin chain. It was an abstract shape, a burst of intricate silver lines radiating from a central point. A firework. "For someone who understands that timing isn't always what we plan," he said, his green eyes soft and serious. "Sometimes it's exactly what we need." He carefully unclasped the chain and fastened it around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. The cool metal settled against her collarbone, a tiny, perfect star. As dusk settled completely, and the first firework of the night streaked into the sky, Daniel gestured with his chin towards a charming, grey-shingled beach house just behind the dunes, its porch-light glowing invitingly. "I was looking at the rental listings," he said casually, though she could hear the undercurrent of excitement in his voice. "That one's available for the winter. I was thinking, what if we didn't have to leave this time? What if we didn't have to drive away on Sunday? What if this became our place?" Lily looked from the house. a beacon of warmth against the darkening sky, to his face, illuminated by a burst of emerald green light from above. In his eyes, she saw their future unfolding, not a frantic recapturing of youth, but something richer, deeper. She saw quiet winters walking this very shore, hand in hand. She saw summers filled with the laughter of their children, and maybe one day their grandchildren. She saw them building something new and lasting on the foundation of that one magical long-ago connection. She lifted her hand to touch the pendant at her throat. Perhaps the heart keeps its own calendar, marking not days or years, but moments of perfect connection. Her gaze met his, full of a love that felt both brand new and ancient. "Some fires burn briefly," she said, her voice full of emotion as she watched the explosion reflect in his eyes. "But others, the ones that matter, they just wait for the right moment to light up the sky again." His fingers found hers, lacing through them, a comfortable, solid weight. As the grand finale began, painting the heavens in a riot of brilliant temporary light, they held on tight. Their story, written in fireworks, was a promise of something far more permanent, a love that had waited patiently for the tide to turn and bring it safely home to shore. When the willow weeps. The sky wept that evening, a relentless, mournful cry that mirrored the one Eleanor Hart often felt trapped within her own chest. It was late autumn in Mississippi in 1846, and the wind, a bitter harbinger of winter, tore at the eaves of her small weathered farmhouse. Inside, the meagre warmth from the hearth fought a losing battle against the chill, seeping through the old panes. 5-year-old Lily, her usually bright eyes shadowed with a childhood weariness Eleanor knew all too well, clung to her skirts, a silent anchor in a world that felt perpetually adrift. Eleanor was trying to coax the last of the corn from the stubbornly damp earth, her hands raw and aching, when the first heavy drops began. She'd looked up at the bruised sky, a familiar wave of despair washing over her. Every season since Thomas had died, it seemed the farm fought her, and she fought back with a weary stubbornness born of necessity. Now, with the storm closing in, the thought of the unharvested corn was a fresh weight on her shoulders. She guided Lily, her small hand swallowed by Eleanor's calloused one, back towards the house, the mud sucking at their worn boots. Just as the wind began to howl in earnest, a knock sounded, startling them both. It was a tentative sound, yet insistent against the roar of the downpour. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Thomas had always warned her about strangers, about the dangers that lurked beyond the familiar rhythm of their isolated life. But Thomas was gone, and the world was a far less predictable place. She opened the door a crack, peering out into the swirling curtain of rain. A man stood silhouetted against the fading light, water streaming from the brim of his wide-brimmed hat, plastering his clothes to his lean frame. He was tall, but there was a distinct list to his left leg, an awkward weight shift that spoke of injury. "Ma'am," he began, his voice surprisingly soft, a low rumble against the storm. "My car broke down a few miles back. Storm caught me. I just need a dry place for the night. I'll be gone by first light." Eleanor hesitated. Her every instinct, honed by years of hardship and sudden loss, screamed caution. This was Mississippi, 1946. Men like him, drifters, sometimes brought trouble. Her gaze flickered to Lily, who had now peeked out from behind her mother's leg, her big, curious eyes fixed on the stranger. Lily, who trusted too easily, whose innocence was a constant, fragile worry. Every fear of her being screamed caution, yet something in his eyes, a profound weariness, tugged at her. It wasn't a threat she saw there, but an exhaustion that mirrored her own. a deep bone-tired ache that seemed to emanate from his very core. He looked less like a threat and more like a man who had seen too much of the world's harshness. A veteran, perhaps. She'd seen that look in the eyes of other men returning from overseas, a haunted distance that no amount of peacetime could erase. "Mummy, he looks cold," Lily whispered, her small voice a tender plea. The man, as if sensing Lily's unspoken compassion, offered a faint, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "I just need a dry place, Mum. I'll earn my keep." His gaze, though tired, was steady, unflinching. Eleanor swallowed, the bitter taste of fear and resignation thick in her mouth. She thought of the long, lonely nights, the creaking of the house, the constant struggle. Could she really turn a soul away on a night like this? A flicker of unexpected empathy, perhaps even a foolish hope, stirred within her. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above the wind's wail. She opened the door wider, allowing him to step into the small, warm embrace of her home. The scent of damp earth clung to him, mingling with the faint metallic tang of the rain. He stepped inside, dripping onto the worn linoleum, and immediately looked around for something to do, his gaze falling on the pile of unchopped firewood by the hearth. "I can help with that, Mum," he offered, his voice still low, almost deferential. He moved slowly, a visible stiffness in his left leg, a subtle favouring that confirmed her suspicion of an injury. A soldier, then, returning from a war that had left scars both visible and unseen. Eleanor watched him, a knot of apprehension slowly loosening in her chest, replaced by a cautious curiosity. His name, he offered, was Daniel Cole, just Daniel. He didn't offer a last name, nor did she press for one. The immediate task was simply to survive the storm, to find shelter from its fury. As he bent, wincing slightly, to stack the firewood, the relentless rain outside, a steady drum against the window panes, became a strange, comforting backdrop to their unexpected shared space. The crackling fire, once just a source of heat, now seemed to hum with a new, tentative life. And in the quiet warmth of her small farmhouse, with Lily's soft breathing beside her, Eleanor felt a fragile sense of peace, a momentary reprieve from the relentless cold of her own grief. She knew this was a gamble, a step into the unknown, but for the first time in a long time she felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, like a seedling pushing through frozen earth, promising life even in the heart of winter. Winter tightened its grip on the Mississippi land, painting the fields in shades of muted grey and stark white. Yet, within the small farmhouse, a different kind of warmth began to bloom, slowly, cautiously, like a flower unfurling after a long, cold night. Daniel Cole, the quiet stranger who had arrived with the storm, had seamlessly woven himself into the fabric of Eleanor and Lily's lives. His promise to earn his keep had been an understatement. He proved himself indispensable, his competence a quiet revelation. The leaning fence by the north pasture, a constant source of worry for Eleanor, was expertly mended, its posts now standing sentinel against the biting wind. The chickens, often neglected in Eleanor's exhaustion, clucked contentedly under his steady hand, their eggs a surprising bounty. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his limp a silent testament to a hidden past, but never an impediment to his work. Lily, initially wary, had been the first to succumb to his gentle charm. Her initial shyness, a protective shell she'd formed since her father's death, began to crack. Daniel had a way with her, a quiet understanding that bypassed words. He'd sit by the fire in the evenings, after the day's work was done, and his large, calloused hands, so adept at mending fences, would delicately whittle small figures from scraps of wood. A bird, its wings outstretched as if in flight. A tiny, sturdy horse. Lily would watch him, mesmerised. her small face alight with a wonder Eleanor hadn't seen in years. "Mr. Daniel, can you make a bird?" she'd ask, her voice a hopeful whisper. And Daniel, with a soft smile, would always oblige. The rhythmic sound of his whittling knife, a soft scrape and whisper of wood, became a comforting counterpoint to the crackling fire, a sound that spoke of creation and quiet industry. Eleanor watched him, her initial apprehension slowly dissolving like mist in the morning sun. She saw the kindness in his eyes when he looked at Lily, a genuine affection that warmed something deep within her. She observed his unwavering respect, his polite distance, his refusal to overstep boundaries. He never pried, never questioned, yet his presence was a constant unspoken offer of support. His presence was a quiet melody in the house, a counterpoint to her usual solitude. She found herself waiting for his return from the fields, for the low murmur of his voice. The house, once echoing with only her own thoughts and Lily's small sounds, now felt fuller, safer. One frigid afternoon, while mending a broken hinge on the barn door, Daniel paused, his breath pluming in the cold air. Eleanor, bundled in her heaviest coat, was helping him, her fingers clumsy with the tools. "It's funny," he mused, his gaze distant, "how sometimes the quiet is the loudest thing of all." Eleanor straightened, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He looked at her then, his eyes, the colour of deep river stone, holding a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. The quiet after the shelling stopped, or the quiet in a hospital tent. It screams, but here the quiet sings. He didn't elaborate, but Eleanor understood. He spoke of the echoes of war, of a soul that's born of trauma, and she, in turn, felt a profound connection to his unspoken pain. For her own silence had been born of loss, of the sudden, devastating quiet after Thomas was gone. They began to share stories, slowly, hesitantly at first, like two strangers cautiously testing the waters of a new friendship. Eleanor spoke of Thomas, her voice soft with lingering grief, of his dreams for the farm, dreams that had become her solitary burden. She spoke of the relentless struggle to keep it alive, the exhaustion that sometimes threatened to swallow her whole. Daniel in turn spoke of the war, not in graphic detail, but in hushed tones of camaraderie and loss, the places he'd seen, the faces he'd known. He spoke of the longing for a place to call his own, a sense of belonging that had been elusive since his return. He admitted to the quiet ache in his leg, a souvenir from a forgotten skirmish, a constant reminder of a past he couldn't outrun. He didn't explicitly say he had nowhere to go, but his words painted a picture of a man adrift seeking an anchor. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, they found themselves by the old willow tree that stood sentinel at the edge of the property. Its stark silhouette, its branches like weeping arms, seemed to mirror the quiet sorrow that had permeated Eleanor's life. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the last vestiges of light fade, the air crisp and cold against their cheeks. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Daniel murmured, his voice low, almost a whisper. Eleanor nodded, a lump forming in her throat. For the first time in months, the beauty didn't feel like a cruel mockery of her pain. It felt shared, a fragile thread woven between them, slowly strengthening with each passing day. The comforting aroma of freshly baked bread, still lingering on her clothes from the morning's baking, seemed to fill the cold air, a domestic warmth that settled around them. As the first star pricked through the twilight, Eleanor felt a subtle shift within her, a quiet unfolding. The willow, once a symbol of her grief, now seemed to stand as a testament to endurance, to the quiet strength found in unexpected company. And as she looked at Daniel, his profile silhouetted against the dying light, she realized that the subtle yearning she felt was not just for the past, but for a future, one that perhaps he might be a part of. Spring arrived in Mississippi with a burst of defiant green, painting the fields in emerald and unfurling the first delicate blossoms on the trees. The world outside the Hart Farm was awakening, but within its small insular community, a different kind of stirring began, the low, insidious hum of gossip. Daniel's presence, once a quiet, almost invisible comfort confined to the isolation of the farm, was becoming more noticeable. He drove Eleanor into town for supplies, his reliable, if patched-up truck a familiar sight on the dirt roads. He helped her sell her small surplus of vegetables at the general store, his quiet demeanour a stark contrast to the usual boisterous farmers. And with each public appearance the whispers grew. Mrs. Henderson, with her sharp eyes and even sharper tongue, was the chief orchestrator of this insidious symphony. Eleanor would catch her gaze at the general store, a knowing, disapproving look that would prickle her skin. The other women in town would fall silent as Eleanor passed, their conversations resuming in hushed tones, punctuated by glances towards her and, more pointedly, towards the tall, quiet man who now often stood by her side. The oppressive silence after a particularly harsh comment, or even just a shared judgmental glance, weighed on Eleanor like a physical burden. Eleanor felt the shift, the tightening of the social noose. She'd always been an outsider, a city girl who had married a farmer and never quite fit into the rigid social fabric of rural Mississippi. Her widowhood, once a source of pity, now seemed to have become a canvas for judgment. She tried to ignore it, to focus on the burgeoning life of the farm, on the quiet joy Daniel brought into Lily's world. The fresh spring blossoms, so vibrant and full of promise, seemed incongruous with the building tension, a cruel irony. Then came Martha. Eleanor's late husband's sister, Martha Thorne, was a woman who embodied the town's conservative values, a woman who believed in order, propriety, and the sanctity of family reputation above all else. Her unannounced visit one sun-drenched afternoon in late spring felt less like a social call and more like an inquisition. Martha swept into the farmhouse, her starched dress rustling, her eyes missing nothing. She took in Daniel, who had just come in from mending a fence, his shirt dusted with earth, a quiet presence in the small living room. Her gaze lingered on him, cold and assessing, before turning back to Eleanor, her smile thin and unconvincing. "Eleanor, dear," Martha began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We've been hearing things in town." She paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "About your living arrangements. And with Lily here, well, it's for her good, isn't it? What will people say?" Her questions were veiled threats, each word a subtle jab at Eleanor's perceived impropriety. Eleanor felt a slow burn of anger rise within her. "My daughter is safe with me, Martha, and Daniel is a good man. He's been a great help with the farm." Martha's smile tightened further. "Help is one thing, Eleanor, but a man living under a widow's roof? It sets tongues wagging, and wagging tongues can hurt Lily." Her gaze flickered to Lily, who was quietly playing with one of Daniel's whittled birds on the floor, seemingly oblivious to the tension. Yet Eleanor knew Lily absorbed everything. Daniel, who had been standing silently by the door, his presence a solid, reassuring anchor, shifted. He didn't speak, but his gaze, usually so soft, now held a glint of steel. After Martha finally departed, leaving behind a lingering scent of lavender and judgment, Eleanor felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The righteous indignation that had fueled her defiance against Martha now drained away, leaving her hollowed out. The whispers, the stares, Martha's veiled threats, it was all a suffocating weight. She sank onto a kitchen chair, burying her face in her hands, the quiet tears a testament to her profound weariness. Daniel found her there moments later, the clatter of a drop plate from her earlier agitation having drawn him from the barn. He didn't say anything, just stood by the doorway for a moment, his presence a silent question. Then he moved to her, his movements gentle, unhurried. He didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. Instead, he simply knelt beside her, his large hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You don't have to carry it all alone," he murmured, his voice a low, comforting balm. His touch, so unexpected, so tender, was a revelation. It wasn't the fleeting, accidental brush of hands as they worked, but a deliberate, comforting connection. Eleanor slowly lifted her head, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just the quiet, wounded veteran, but a man of immense strength and unexpected tenderness. In that moment, a profound understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the burdens they both carried, and the quiet defiance that was beginning to bind them together. The blossoming affection between them, once a fragile bud, was now pushing through the soil, resilient and determined, despite the chilling winds of small-town judgment. The spring, with its promise of new life, was also bringing with it a reckoning. Summer descended upon Mississippi with a vengeance, the air thick and heavy, pressing down on the land and on Eleanor's heart. The whispers, once confined to the general store and Martha's veiled threats, had escalated into a full-blown storm. The humid air seemed to carry the weight of judgment, stifling and suffocating. The ultimate blow landed on Eleanor's doorstep one sweltering afternoon. A formal summons to the county courthouse. Her late husband's family, spearheaded by Martha and her brother, had filed a petition for custody of Lily. The grounds were laid out in stark legalistic language. Eleanor's immoral conduct and unstable environment, due to the presence of Daniel Cole, a man of unknown origins and questionable character. The paper trembled in Eleanor's hand, its cold officialdom a stark contrast to the furious heat that flared within her. Her initial reaction was a fierce, protective rage. How dare they question her love for Lily, her ability to provide a home? But beneath the anger, a cold, insidious fear began to coil. They had power, connections, and the weight of small-town morality on their side. The day of the hearing was a blur of oppressive heat and suffocating anxiety. The courthouse was a grand, imposing structure, its columns a stark reminder of the law's unyielding nature. Inside, the air was thick with unspoken judgment, a palpable tension that made it hard to breathe. The stifling heat of the courtroom seemed to magnify every nervous tremor. Eleanor sat beside a nervous elderly lawyer, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her in-laws sat opposite, Martha's face a mask of righteous indignation, her brother, a stern-faced vet, beside her. Lily, thankfully, was with a trusted neighbour, spared the ugliness of the proceedings. The accusations began, a parade of veiled slights and outright slanders. Martha testified, her voice clear and cutting, painting a picture of Eleanor as a neglectful mother, too caught up in an illicit affair to care for her child. The shame washed over Eleanor in waves, scalding her cheeks, making her want to shrink into nothing. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Her private grief and unexpected solace twisted into something sordid and wrong. The rustle of papers as legal documents were presented seemed to mock her, each page another indictment. Then Daniel, who had been sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, a silent, watchful presence, stood. Eleanor hadn't even known if he would come, knowing the scrutiny it would bring him. But there he was, a steadfast anchor in a sea of hostility. "Your Honour," he said, his voice, usually so soft, resonating with an unexpected strength that cut through the stuffy courtroom air. "May I speak?" The judge, a weathered man with tired eyes, nodded, a flicker of curiosity in his gaze. Daniel moved forward, his limp more pronounced under the strain, but his gaze unwavering. He stood tall before the judge, facing the accusing stares of Martha and her brother, and the curious, judgmental eyes of the townsfolk who had come to watch the spectacle. Eleanor Hart is a good woman, he stated, his voice clear, unyielding. And this child is loved, more than anything. She works that farm day and night to keep a roof over Lily's head. She's faced more hardship than most folks could imagine, and she's done it with grace and courage. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom, lingering for a moment on Eleanor's tear-filled eyes. I am a veteran. I fought for this country, and I came here looking for nothing but a quiet place to heal. Eleanor Hart, she gave me that. She took in a stranger, gave him shelter, gave him work. She didn't ask questions. She just saw a man in need. His voice deepened, a raw emotion entering it. To say she's immoral, to say she's unfit, it's a lie. She's the strongest woman I've ever met. And if loving someone who helps her, who respects her, who cares for her child is immoral, then I don't know what decency is. Eleanor listened, her heart swelling with an emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm her. Shame receded, placed by a fierce wave of love and gratitude. He was standing up for her, for them, risking everything in a town that would judge him even more harshly for it. His words were a balm to her battered soul, a shield against the public shaming. In that moment, a profound realization bloomed within her. This quiet, wounded man, who had walked into her life with the rain, had become more than just a helper, more than just a friend. He was her solace, her strength, her quiet defiance. The fear that had gripped her for so long began to recede, replaced by a fierce, undeniable truth. When it was her turn to speak again, her voice, though trembling, was clear, fueled by a newfound conviction. He is my family and my daughter's, she declared, her gaze fixed on the judge, then sweeping to Martha and finally settling on Daniel. Daniel has brought light back into our lives. He has helped me keep this farm, helped me raise my child, and if loving him, if building a future with him means facing your judgment, then so be it. I will not deny my heart, nor the love that has given us both hope. The words hung in the air. A public declaration, a defiant stand against the conservative tide of the town. Eleanor knew it would only intensify the scrutiny, that the fight was far from over. But as she looked at Daniel, his eyes filled with a raw reciprocal love, she felt an unwavering certainty. This was not just about Lily, it was about reclaiming her own life, her own choices, her own heart. The tremors in her hands were no longer from fear, but from the trembling intensity of a love that was finally, defiantly out in the open. The immediate aftermath of the court hearing was a fractured sense, a palpable tension that hung heavy over the small Mississippi town. The judgment for Lily's custody was pending, leaving Eleanor and Daniel in a state of suspended animation, a constant hum of anxiety beneath their skin. Yet in that uncertainty something else stirred, a quiet, unwavering resolve. The community, once a monolithic wall of conservative judgment, showed cracks. Some, particularly the women who had endured their own hardships and quiet rebellions, offered Eleanor small encouraging nods at the general store, a hushed, "Bless your heart, Eleanor," that carried more weight than any public declaration of support. The older men, their faces etched with the wisdom of the land, would offer Daniel a respectful tip of their hats, a silent acknowledgement of his courage in the courtroom. It was a divided reaction, but the pockets of empathy, once invisible, now shimmered with a quiet hope. Regardless of the legal outcome, Eleanor and Daniel made a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. They would build a life together, on their own terms. The farm, once Eleanor's solitary burden, transformed into a shared dream. They spent the late summer and early autumn days planning, talking for hours under the shade of the old willow tree. Its branches, once weeping with Eleanor's grief, now seemed to whisper promises of resilience and growth swaying gently in the breeze. "We could plant more corn next year," Daniel suggested one evening, sketching lines in the dirt with a stick. "And maybe a small patch of cotton for extra income." I know a few buyers down in Meridian." His voice was full of a quiet enthusiasm Eleanor hadn't heard from him before, a practical optimism that grounded her swirling anxieties. Eleanor listened, her heart swelling. He wasn't just talking about crops, he was talking about a future, their future. "And the barn needs new roofing before winter," she added, already seeing the possibilities, the shared burdens, the collective strength. Lily, oblivious to the legal battles raging around them, was a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. Her innocent joy, her bright laughter as she chased butterflies through the fields, was a pure, unadulterated source of hope. Daniel, now Papa Daniel to her, would lift her onto his shoulders, his limp forgotten in his eagerness to make her laugh. The rhythmic sounds of the farm animals, the clucking of chickens, the lowing of cows, the occasional bleat of a lamb, were no longer just the cacophony of her solitary struggle, but a comforting backdrop to their burgeoning family life. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the leaves on the willow tree began to turn a brilliant gold, Eleanor and Daniel sat beneath its sprawling branches, watching Lily play in a patch of sunlight. She was meticulously arranging small wildflowers into a makeshift bouquet, humming to herself. The warmth of the late summer sun bathed them, a golden promise. Daniel reached for Eleanor's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. His touch was no longer tentative but firm, possessive, yet infinitely tender. "No matter what happens, Eleanor," he said, his voice low, his gun fixed on her, "we face it together." A profound sense of peace settled over Eleanor, a feeling she hadn't known was possible after so much loss. She squeezed his hand, her eyes glistening. "Always," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The word, a simple declaration, felt weighty with the promises of their shared past, their uncertain present, and their hopeful future. Lily, catching sight of a vibrant monarch butterfly fluttering past, gasped with delight. "Look, Mama, Papa Daniel, a butterfly!" she exclaimed, pointing a tiny finger. They watched it together, a fleeting moment of beauty and serenity. The butterfly, a symbol of transformation and new beginnings, danced through the air, free and unburdened. As they sat there hand in hand, the old willow tree swaying gently above them, its branches now a symbol of their enduring strength, Eleanor knew they had already won. The custody battle might be decided by a judge, but their love, forged in the quiet resilience of their hearts, had already found its resolution. They had found not just a love to shelter them from the storm, but a promise of home in each other's arms, their hearts finally at peace. Their future, like the endless sky above them, was open, waiting to be written by their own hands, their own unwavering love.